horses die of worms. That's just a case. If you've got horses coming, you do not know what they're bringing with them, and you do not want that shed all over your pasture. Your faces are a picture, guys. I love it. It is something that we do really need to get a hold of. You really can't tell, and then all of a sudden you've got something catastrophic going on. We sometimes talk about science and art and then more existential stuff like they're at odds with each other, but I think they're so complementary. You know, like, it's that whole horse holistic approach.
This season is brought to you by the Harry Hall One Club. Hello everybody, happy Wednesday, welcome back. How you doing, Rizzle? Rizzle Dizzle. I keep wanting to call you Rizzle Dizzle and I hate that about me, but I just did it on the podcast, so there we go.
Yeah, it's one of those names. My friend, I used to have a friend that used to call me Bad Gal Riri, and I was like, I don't hate that. That can stay. Personal brand, tick.
What about Rizzle Dizzle? Do you like that?
Sure.
It's very
I'll roll
Snoop.
with it.
It's very Snoop,
Yeah.
isn't it? You are
Very
Bad Gal. You
90s.
are. Yeah, very 90s. Yeah, anyway,
Yeah.
Are you well?
Yeah, yeah, I'm good. I'm rizzling and dizzling along. I'm feeling great. I have an update, a weather update, sort of. Do you remember last time I said there was that weather chart, and I said that I was confused because it went so high towards 33 and 38, and I was like, I don't know where it came from. I just saw that a riding school shared it. Well, I was scrolling through social yesterday, and I saw a post by, I'm just trying to find it, the ARBS, I think it's like the British Riding School Association is who they are, and it's their chart, which makes sense. That's why a riding school is sharing it. And they actually shared a post because I think they've had some commentary on the temperature guide that they shared, and so I thought it's worth sharing for their for the context of what they shared, because I think a lot of people have been having the conversation we had. So I'm going to read it out. It's quite long, but I think it's probably worth it. With temperatures rising, we've seen a number of comments suggesting that horses should not work above 30 degrees Celsius for our American listeners. We understand why people are concerned. Horse welfare should always come first. At ABRS Plus, we believe that conversations are important. These conversations are important, sorry. However, they should be informed by veterinary advice and scientific evidence rather than by air temperature alone. Our hot weather risk assessment, which is the chart that I spoke through last time, has been developed with experienced equine veterinary input and is based on current scientific understanding of equine thermoregulation. It recognises that there is no single air temperature at which every horse should stop work. Instead, appropriate decisions depend on a range of factors, including the individual horse's age, health and fitness, humidity and environmental conditions, the type, duration and intensity of exercise, access to shade, water and effective cooling, how well the horse has acclimatised to warmer weather. Healthy horses are naturally well adapted to warm conditions and, when appropriately managed, can undertake suitable levels of exercise in hot weather. Often the limiting factor is actually the safety of the human rider. Equally, there will be circumstances where reducing work, changing activities or not working at all is the right welfare decision. Every horse should be assessed as an individual. Our guidance is therefore a risk assessment tool, not a simple temperature cutoff. It is designed to help make informed, welfare-based decisions rather than that reflect the best available evidence. As an organisation representing riding schools, we also recognise the wider responsibility we have. Riding schools are also under significant financial pressure, and unnecessary restrictions can have real consequences for their sustainability. Equally, no financial consideration should ever outweigh horse welfare. That is precisely why our guidance must be evidence-based. If the science indicates that work should stop, then it should stop. If the science indicates that healthy horse can safely undertake appropriate levels of work under carefully managed conditions, then our guidance should reflect that too. Horse welfare is best served by decisions based on evidence, not arbitrary temperature limits. And then they share it and say, we'd love to hear your thoughts, basically. So I was like, I get it. Context is important. I still find 33 to 38 degrees a bit of a challenge, but I get it. Humidity is fair. The humidity comment I thought is actually very fair because that does change completely how temperature feels.
Mm-hmm. I think the difficulty is it's a very wobbly line that is being drawn. And I think that it can lead to poor judgments being made because these decisions are being based on a judgment of, yeah, it's all right. That horse is fine, you know, rather than that is unsafe because if there are things that have been missed, underlying asthma, a heart condition, gut problems, dehydration. I could maybe list a few more. If those things are not really closely monitored, and let's be realistic, are we all able to monitor those things really? Without knowing? You wouldn't know your horse had a heart condition until it had a heart condition, but you might never find out if you never ride it in 35 degrees. And the issue that go on.
Well, I was just going to say, but then it's like, if we don't have the guidance, then what do we base it on? And if we disagree,
the guidance, yes, but maybe the guidance needs to leave a bit more space, because I'm thinking is, if you're saying it's okay to ride a horse in 33 to 38 degrees, you are pushing that horse to the very limit of its capability, because when the third degree, over 38, okay, no, that is unsafe. Okay, well, what about if that horse has a minor thing that's going on with it from between something that's going on with it, and then past 33 degrees, it's absolutely unacceptable and it keels over, then what? I think the comment about, they literally, maybe I'm going to get myself in trouble for this, but I think that the comment around the financial implication is really very difficult for me, because they're saying, riding schools run a significant financial strain. Okay, understood. And then they're saying, but no decision on welfare should be made because of financial implication. Okay, but then you should have the cutoff far lower. Because then what you're doing in these situations, as far as I can tell, is pushing the limit as far as you can, so that then the financial strain isn't put on the riding school. But in my experience, having a training livery facility with 17 horses, I know I can't be training my horses in the middle of the day when it's past whatever degree, 30, probably, if I'm honest, 28, 29. Because it feels really different in the horse, in myself, in my staff. We completely shift the way that we do things. We get up earlier. We live like the Spanish. We get up really early. We make sure the horses are comfortable through the middle of the day. We turn them out late, and we manage things differently. We start exercising at 6 a.m. and we finish around 9:30, 10 o'clock, when it just starts to tip into that slightly uncomfortable place. I can't get on board with this. And I think to myself, if this is going to be the way the climate is going to be, right? I know we talked about this a lot at the beginning of this season, and I'm sorry if you guys are a bit tuned out to it because we're talking about it so much. But the reality is, this isn't a heat wave. This is the summer now. And if this is the case, and we are worried about the financial implications to riding schools, well, they need more support. The government needs to step in.
Well, that being said, I was like go back and forth on it, and I think this is good because we don't want to be one way or the other. But because I was thinking, what would make them go? And I want to be clear that when they had the 33 to 38 degree, they said like you should consider cancelling, but it wasn't like a flat line. And I was like, well, my friend pointed out some of the horses in Paris had to contend with heat temperatures like that. And I was like, yeah, but they're professional riders and really fit horses. And then I was like, well, actually, riding school horses are probably quite fit because they're doing lots of work. And then I was like, is it the same? Is it different? Because a lot of them are likely to be native breeds. And then I was like, well, what if you had a school that has an open side and a roof over the top? Does that change? And I was just going back and forth with myself. And I was like, ultimately, all I can do is stand in front of my own horse and go, he's not really comfortable over 25 degrees. And now he's clipped, actually, he's much more comfortable. But, but I hear what you're saying, like, should the guidance be lower? And it is guidance at the end of the day. Like, they could just ignore it if they really wanted to.
I happened to have a conversation at a riding school fairly recently. And I said to them, do you stop during the middle of the day when it's hot? And they were like, no. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I said, did you stop when there was a red weather warning? When it was like danger to life? No. And I thought, has it been considered? Like, was it a conversation that took place? I don't know the answer to that. But I was quite taken aback by the kind of free rangeness of that. Just no. I was like,
I do know there's a riding school near us that I really rate, actually. I think they're really good, and they always have they're really good at moving horses on who either have been there for too long or are not suited to the life. They really look after them. They have inspections every year. They're good. I kind of trust them with the horses. And they did adapt. They were like, we're not doing this. We're doing hacks through the woodlands, shade. And they did do that, but like you said, it didn't stop. But I think even that is yeah, is better. And maybe to your point around this is summer now, I'm like, would it be different next year if all our horses had this summer and then summer just builds up to a higher temperature? Does it get better? I'd love to talk to someone in like Wellington or something, because they have really hot summers.
I was literally about to say that. We've been talking a lot about the summer and the heat in this season of the podcast. And although we love the summer because it's nice to be outside with our horses when it's warm and sunny, it doesn't mean that it comes without risks. Warmer weather can mean dry, hard ground and colic triggers like dehydration. These things could impact your horse at any time. This is why having the right cover in place makes all the difference, especially to your stress levels. That is why Harry Hall One Club offers vet fee cover you can rely on. From just £8.40 per month, it covers you for accidental external visible injury. That's injuries from accidents like cuts and wounds, rather than illness, and there is no upper age limit or vetting required. With transparent pricing, you pay the same as everyone else, and they truly believe that every horse matters, so the prices are the same for every horse. They don't ask you to choose your favourite horse if you own more than one, and you can cover multiple horses with no extra premium and share your vet fee cover value across all of them. And because everybody has different needs, you also have the flexibility to add optional cover like colic surgery, disposal, mortality, theft and straying. It is all part of the Harry Hall One Club approach, giving you practical, straightforward cover that works for the real equestrian life. Now, most of us can begrudge paying out for insurance each month because it sometimes feels like it doesn't offer much value unless you actually need to make a claim, but this is where Harry Hall One Club is refreshingly different. It's the go-to equestrian membership that combines insurance and money-saving perks together in one simple package from as little as £5.75 per month. To get cover, you simply sign up as a One Club member. This gives you public liability, personal accident and equine legal expenses cover as standard. When you join, you get perks included such as a legal helpline, 24/7 counselling service, free delivery, returns and exclusive discounts on harryhall.com, partner offers and event tickets. It helps you ensure you're getting your money's worth all year round, even if you never need to claim. So you could get all of that plus vet fee cover from as little as £14.15 per month. Members trust Harry Hall too, with thousands of excellent reviews and a reputation built since 1891, with a track record of paying over 99% of valid claims within 14 days and over 95% of their reviewers recommending Harry Hall. Plus, you'll always get friendly, Yorkshire-based support when you need it. So you can feel confident if something does go wrong, you'll be supported when it matters most. You can take their 2-minute quiz via the link in the show notes and it'll help you find out which membership level might be fit for you. Plus, when you join and get cover, you'll receive a £10 gift voucher to spend at harryhall.com. And if it's not for you, you can cancel within 14 days. No stress. Join the One Club and get cover today. Back to the podcast. So I have a client in Florida. And I said to her, I was like, how do you handle it? And she's like, we don't ride past 9 a.m. They have really bad high humidity. The humidity is high, very high, like 100% humidity sometimes, you know, so it's like suffocatingly moist in the air. But what she was said is we just start early. The horses have fans. She's shown me her setup actually, because I want to be able to diversify what I'm doing, because I'm like, well, the whole world is heating up, so we've got to do something to make sure the horses are comfortable. But like, they have 2 fans in every stable, so they have a cross breeze. So it's not just they have a through breeze, they have a cross breeze. Then she has big fans in the middle of the barn that then circulate the air through the whole barn as well. They have an overhang at the back of the stables, so the windows don't have direct sunlight hitting the back of the stables.
But also Wellington is like, just for context for those who don't know, Wellington is described as equestrian Disneyland. Like, there's a lot of money in Wellington. So if you're going to get state of the art, it will be there.
I mean, this lady, she just has her horses at home, though. She's not on a big yard. This is just what she has.
Interesting.
She has put in because doesn't have a choice. That's just what she has to do. The weather. That's what the weather does. And what she was saying is, you know, the horses do acclimatise to a point, but they're not going to suddenly be a different species. Like, it was so interesting. I went to Nep recently after. We had lovely Rena on the podcast for the last season, and we went to Nep, friends and I, and we were meant to be doing the pony safari where you go and see the ponies in the wild. They cancelled it because it was too hot. These horses are in the wild. The reason they cancelled it was because it was dangerous for people to be walking through in that heat. You know, you've got to be able to walk for a couple of hours and it would have been hot and awful and unpleasant. So they cancelled it and rescheduled it. But I also think, having spoken to Rena privately about it, she said that it was, the horses would take themselves off and essentially just stand in the shade. Like, they're not going to be like out doing things. And I think this is the reality. Horses are going to choose to go and sit in the shade and not move.
Yeah.
They're not going to be going out posturing and doing their mating rituals when it's 35 degrees. Like, I'm struggling with this a bit. I personally, and I think I'm struggling with it because of that mention of the financial implication, because I just think that we absolutely have to support our riding schools more differently. Like, I grew up riding on a riding school. I did. I could never be the person I am today if it wasn't for the riding school that I grew up on. It was the absolute lifeblood of my passion for ponies, horses, training, learning. I had amazing coaches, amazing horses, and it was in London. So, they had the ponies went out for like 3 days at a time and then came back in, and they were in stables quite a lot of the time. And then they turned them out for like a good couple of months in the year. Like, they had a really different way of managing things. And I'm not saying that we should get rid of riding schools. I'm not saying that we should import part rules on riding schools, but I do think that there should be a buffer for these places when they can't safely. And what are we teaching people? That was the thing that came up for me. What are we teaching people about animal welfare in these moments? Because I don't think we teach anything about animal welfare anymore. There's some terrifying statistic about kids not even knowing that beef is a cow in primary school.
We really should try and get a riding school owner on to talk about, how do you manage the financial business and the welfare and in this climate and in this moment.
I wonder if I could get the person who... when I was at the riding school I was great friends with the daughter of the riding school owner. She now runs it.
Love that.
So I wonder if she would come and talk to us. But I think it's an important conversation, where are we starting kids out? It's like the pony club. They may be following similar advice. Where are we starting these things out?
That's where I saw it, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe not. No, I saw it from riding school, but the pony club shared it too, or they had a very similar one that they were sharing or something.
And I think it's this tricky balance, isn't it? Between, yes, of course, it's a business and we need it to be financially viable so that we can look after the horses appropriately. But we also need it to be a system that teaches people about the importance of listening to the animal that you are working with. Not just the fact that you learnt to do riding trot today, but the pony nearly killed over. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe I'm being a bit black and white about it, but I think if you really sat someone down and said, really asked them these questions, I don't know if they would have a valid tricky. But then they're saying it's evidence-based, aren't they? They're saying it comes from evidence.
Yeah, they're saying science. Yeah, the science. And I wish that we'd learn a bit more about that. I know it's not like they don't owe us the science, but like, it's just interesting, isn't it?
I'd love to know what paper the paper that the study that they were founding this information on. It was interesting. The other day, my vet came. It was later on in the afternoon, one of the days when it was super hot, and one of the horses was having a vaccine. So it was, fairly minor thing. And I said, is this safe? And he said, yes, it's absolutely fine. This isn't going to put significant stress on their body. They're a young horse. They're good, fit and healthy. It's going to be okay. And we couldn't not do it because of the time. We basically, it would have run out as such.
Yeah. And then you'd have had to then
we'd have to start again and all those different things. And of course you could have done that, but the horse, fit, healthy, young horse. And anyway, some of the horses stood in when it was super, super hot. We're a bit sweaty, right?
Yeah.
We were about to wash them all off and turn them all out, but the heat had built throughout the day. And I was like, oh, it's a bit hot in here. And he's like, it's okay. They're doing what they're designed to do. And I was like, when they're stood resting like that, they were just sweating a bit, but they were doing what they needed to do, And that was an important reminder for me of like, no, okay, it's actually okay for a horse to sweat a little bit when it is really extremely hot, but potentially don't ride it,
Well, that was the thing that made me go, well, actually, I didn't go, you did, about clipping Harley, because he was sweating just standing in. And I was like, oh, I just can't help him. But yeah, we had a vet actually cancel a few appointments on our yard because they needed sedation. And obviously, if you've ever had a horse sedated, it heats them up. Their temperature goes higher. I don't know the science behind it, but I know they get warm. And they were like, it's just not safe to do that. No.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I was meant to be doing the same. But yeah.
You had a busy weekend.
Oh, I did. Oh, it was so exciting. I was part of the Horsemanship Masterclass that was arranged by Mia Rodley. So if you don't know, Mia is amazing. I call her a force of nature because I don't know how she does all of the things she does. She's incredible. She's the heart of horsemanship. And so what she did was she arranged some amazing professionals to come from all over the world. So Will Rogers came all the way from Sweden. And Will Rogers is a really cool guy. He's like the guy, if you've seen those amazing horses doing really cool things in the mountains in Switzerland or the Dolomites. I can't remember where it was, but like these like big grey horses, big tall guy with long legs.
What do they do?
They're free. They're at Liberty, and they're all working in a Liberty team, but in like remote, rural. Okay,
I love it though. It sounds great.
Yeah, very cool. No doubt some of you guys will have seen it, but he was there, and he's like a Liberty professional. He's also now studying a lot of like reconnecting with self, which is really interesting. A fascinating conversation.
Did he bring horses?
Pardon?
Did he bring horses, or did he just come alone?
So that was the interesting thing. So he came, without any horses. So it wasn't a demo. It was like a clinic. So basically, Mia and I were trained by these people. And there were other people too. I'll tell you about them in a moment. And then there were 2 other people as well that had lessons. I had 2 a day, Mia had 2 a day, and then 2 other people both had 1 session a day. And it was also a lady called Miri, who is a Liberty specialist, and she is the person who I listened to the podcast of. I think I told you about this. It's an incredible person. I'd listened to this podcast. Yes. I was absolutely fascinated by her story. She had grown up training cows, how to ride Roman ride, and all this amazing stuff that you can teach a horse to do. She taught a cow to do it too. And then her partner, Brendan Wise, who jumps Grand Prix bridleless. Because did you know that in the US there are no rules to say you can't?
Really?
Yeah.
Even not FEI. What's the US one? US Federation or whatever?
Well,
no, not that. The US Fair, something, whatever. The US Federation.
Basically, it is up to the steward on the day. If you are deemed safe, you can carry on. But that goes both directions. That also means there are very few tack rules.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So then you do see some, he called it imaginative ways of using a bridle. So we won't get into that. But he jumps Grand Prix without a bridle on. Incredible. Absolutely. Like, you guys, we'll put all these people in the show notes, because if you don't follow them, you should, because they are literally magic. Like, you're like watching it like, what the hell? And so we had training with these amazing people. So I had training with Mia. Mia taught me as well with Zora, doing our bridleless staff. And then I had training with Kaylee. And it was so interesting. So on the first day with Zora, I filmed YouTube videos on it, so you will see this on YouTube if you're interested. But on the first day with Zora, she had a lot of energy. And not energy in a good sense, quite stressed energy. It was a big deal, big crowd, like quite a kind of big atmosphere, new place, on her own in the arena, all these different things. And so me and Mia worked through it. It was good. We did some stuff. I didn't take the halter off completely. I just rode like with the neck rope, but with the halter still on for safety. And then my session with Kaylee, it was so interesting. We worked really on me becoming an energetic leader for Zora. Yeah, so I've written a whole thing about like what I've learned, but I really learned that I didn't know how to lead with my energy. I can just lead with my like knowledge as such.
Yeah, you've talked about this before. You talked about this. I think it might not have even been on camera. Like, we were talking to Mia, and you talked about the whole moving the feet and going through the motions of groundwork patterns without. And Mia was like, you want to get to the point where they're moving without you, like, you're not looking at the feet anymore, you're looking at the ear and the eye. And yeah, I get this. I feel like you've been on this journey.
Yeah, and even less than the ear and the eye, but more just that you start asking the question with your energy and they start responding. And it was fascinating because Zora kind of went from like really, and Kaylee actually took Zora's rope and did some work with her. And it was fascinating because you kind of saw Zora like pendulate from this quite heightened state to like, oh, you've got me. Okay. You know, like, oh, you're here. Okay. And it was just absolutely, yeah, it was mind blowing. There were a couple of like things that I got from it. So the first day as well, I was woefully anxious. Like, my anxiety just showed up and wouldn't leave. And it was really hard. And I was like crippled by this fear that I was going to start throwing up and I wouldn't be able to stop, and then I wouldn't be able to have my session. And one of the things that we spoke about was unkinking the hose. So this energy getting stuck in your body like this, unkinking where the hose is kinked to allow the energy to then flow in or out regardless. And it really helped me. This session with Kaylee really helped unkink the hose, because I was like, okay, bring my energy up. Okay, bring my energy down, and bring my energy back into my body to encourage her to walk backwards, and then forwards, and then backwards, and then sideways. And it was like I was shifting. I'm like doing this funny little robot dance. I'm like pushing the energy forward, backwards, sideways. And Zora was then like with me. And on the second day, I cried in my session, because the feeling of that energy shift was huge. But after the first session on the first day, I felt so much better. And we started talking about this kinking of the hose. You know, where's that kink in the energy? Where are you not letting it out? So that was one of the things. I'm going to read a few more before we maybe talk about them. Boundaries offer safety.
Yeah. Okay. Nice. I like that.
So by saying to Zora, listen when I ask, listen when I move, it created a feeling of, in Zora, because she was like, you're here to help me, you can help me feel better. That was a really big one.
We talk about that in training, like clarity is kind. Like that, guardrails are kind, because your horse knows exactly what they need, what you need from them. And horses pick up stuff really quickly when we're not inconsistent.
Yes, when we are inconsistent, they really are not good. One of the ones that came up from Will, which was really cool, that we are all born being able to feel connection. We just lose it as we get older, but we can find it again.
Childlike energy. I'm shimmying.
This one was from Brendan. The horse you think you will never be able to ride bridleless is the one you need to learn to ride bridleless the most. And then one of the other ones from Brendan was that there are many ways to untangle the body. And this was this session he had on the second day where he rode the lesson horse, this amazing horse that came to the bridleless competition and jumped the 120 course at the bridleless competition.
Is this the chestnut horse?
No, the bay one.
Anyway.
Owned by a lady called Georgie. Anyway, he rode him and it was fascinating. He had this conversation with him where he was asking him, with a no bridle on, to bend left, lift and open the right shoulder and step away from his left leg. Rhi's just doing the maths in her head. So away from the left leg and up and out into the right shoulder.
Okay, is the horse moving at this point? Like moving over?
Sort of like yielding on a circle, like a small shape.
Okay. And
it was fascinating because he said, can you move your body like this? And the horse said, I'm finding that really hard. And this horse turned his head round and was like mouthing at his foot, right? And he just didn't escalate. He didn't make it worse, but he also didn't totally back off, okay? And this horse, because he wasn't wearing a bridle, was able to turn around and say, that pressure there is really hard for me. And I don't currently feel like I have the solution in my body to what that pressure means. I don't have the answer to the question that you're asking, right? And when we had the Q&A at lunchtime, somebody asked, they said, when the horse of the morning was saying, I'm not sure, when was the point where you decided that that was okay to push through rather than back off?
Great
look,
question.
I'm just replaying the experience. This isn't necessarily my own belief, but it was very interesting to hear Brendan's answer. And what he said was, again, we come back to the kinking of the hose. This horse had a kind of stuckness in the body, coming away from left leg, up and out into the right shoulder. There was a blockage in the body. And this is what I mean is there are many ways to untangle the body. Now, some would say you could do that from the ground, but when you do it with the rider on top without the bridle, there's a kind of an openness to the conversation that you don't necessarily have if you have a rope halter in your hand and you're saying do this at the front end, if that makes sense. And what Brendan said was, he said, in a moment like that, I always check in with myself when I'm asking the question to see if there is a single iota of doubt or uncertainty as to whether I feel the question is fair or whether I feel the horse is going to be able to respond in an easy enough way, basically. And he felt in that moment that was fair. And it was, you could see the horse, he went through that feeling. And the other thing that Brendan said, which I thought was like absolutely, my brain slightly fell on the floor at this moment when I was listening, was he said, in that moment, if I come away from that question and the horse doesn't offer a different answer to the question, which, bear in mind, this is very consent-based. He stood there, the horse could walk away at any moment. It's only in a neck rope. It's not like it's being held in place with a bit or a draw rein or anything. He said what I'd showed that horse in that moment as well was that he can feel a change in his body, and that by asking the question and keeping asking the question until he gave the new answer, i.e. move the shoulder away, find the answer, because to the left, the other way, left shoulder up, right hip away, no problem at all. So there was just an imbalance in the body. Very sound horse, all of these things, we're not dealing with a real big problem here. This guy's jumping big jumps, it's all good. And it was just so interesting to hear him sort of see this horse's boundary, not escalate past it, not push the horse till he had to shout, but just say to the horse, could you find another answer here? Can you find another answer here? And what that did is it not only unlocked part of that horse's body physically, but it also created a feeling of confidence for this horse in a very different way, that he was like, oh, I can be asked a hard question and I can find a different answer. I don't have to just close that off and say, no, my body can't do that. And I just thought it was this fascinating, so eloquently explained thought process of training horses and how we can help them so much with dysfunction, with flow of energy, with use of their body by going through moments of, I'm doing air quotes, everyone, discomfort. Because was it physically uncomfortable, or was it a bit of a stuckness? Maybe it was a tightness. It was dealt with in such a calm, soft, and as soon as he gave this horse, as soon as he slightly tried the right thing, even just shifted his weight the right way, Brendan just stopped. Leg pressure came off, everything stopped. It wasn't like, he waited until the horse gave the whole answer. Fractional things. And I don't know, I just came away from the whole weekend with this really altered mindset, I think, of actually how you can help a horse so much by teaching them amazing skills. I think that's my biggest takeaway, is like, if you give your horse huge skill set, can you move like this but that way but this way? Can you listen to my energy? Can you be responsive to my aids? Can you focus on yourself? Can you feel this feeling? The world opens for them. And for me, the feeling I had from Zora at the end of the weekend, when I rode her on the second day, bridleless, after one session with Mia, 2 sessions with Kaylee, and then another session with Mia, was a feeling I haven't had before. Because it was like, she was like, yeah, I'm capable. I am embodying what I am capable of. And it was exhausting and magical and everything in between.
What I like about this is that even if you take this away and you're like, how can I learn from this with my traditional training? I ride with a bridle and a saddle and a this and a that, and I don't really know how to do groundwork yet, maybe. I think this philosophy of, when we're training horses, yes, we're trying to get their body straighter, more rhythmical, more flexible, whatever, supple, and we're trying to teach them to do things in terms of actual skills. But every time we train, a lot of the philosophy is, I am going to give you the confidence that you can answer every question that I'm going to ask you. And my coach talks about this a lot, and I think you do as well, but like, our horses, every time we work with our horses, we can either build confidence in them that they can trust us, that we will never give them a question they can't answer, either mentally, emotionally, physically. We might ask them hard questions, but we'll never put something in front of them that they can't achieve. And that every time we work with them, we should try and have them walk away feeling like they achieved. And I think that's really lovely, that philosophy.
Yeah, good summary, Rhi. As always, listened to my rambling for however long that was and surmised it really well. But I think, I don't know, and also as a wider thing, to come together with a group of people like that we had these amazing Q&A sessions in the middle of the day, and I was honored to be part of the, I was the answer part. And it was fascinating because it was like this hive mind that started to happen. And I thought, wow, imagine if you did this for like a week, if you all were to spend this time together and have these conversations, and these amazing people came to watch and asked these incredibly insightful questions that opened up these incredible answers. And like, it was fascinating to be a part of something like that. Everybody was just there to help each other. There was no ego. There was no, they're not doing it. It was like, oh, that's where you're at. Cool. How can I help? And it was just, we spent the evening together. We were very fortunate to be part for the night in one of someone's friend's house. And the conversations that we had, you were like, I was just sat there like, I'm never going to get to do, I hope I get to do this again, but this is a once in a lifetime kind of experience,
moment.
Yeah. It felt like once upon a time, all the elders that got together around the campfire, and I'm not saying I'm an elder, bloody hell, but I was certainly among some.
I love that. Special.
Very special. Very, very special. And it has brought about changes in me. I had an amazing ride on Zora yesterday, working on the bridleless stuff. I'm shifting the way that I'm doing things with Blondie. I'm noticing this shift in myself. And it's just, fascinating. I love learning. I think it's my favorite thing to do is to learn. I hope I never lose that.
I know. It's cool. And I feel I'm obviously at a very different stage in my journey to you. I've been trying, I borrowed a friend's hackamore. I think I told you about this actually in the last thing, but it doesn't quite fit. It's like slightly sitting in on his mouth, and decided that it's probably, and it can't sit high enough on the bridle. And I was like, well, I want to set him up for success. So I didn't use it. But I did have a hacking story that I wanted to share, because go on.
Can I give you a piece of advice?
Yes.
If you'd like to start riding bridleless, whether that's in a neck rope or bitless or whatever.
Bitless, yeah.
Put your rope halter on.
Yeah.
Tie the reins up. Tie the rope up so that it attaches, so it's like a loop. Put your bridle over the top.
Yeah. And ride with the rope halter.
Yeah, but ride with both to start with. And then slowly use your bitted reins less and your rope reins more.
Love that. That's simple. Okay. And feels quite safe.
Yeah, very safe. Exactly. And don't take the bridle off. Just leave it there.
Yeah.
You're good.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry, carry on. You had a lovely hacking story.
Wanted to share a hacking story because the amount of DMs I get from people about this revelation that you can get off and get back on and get off and get back on, and how helpful that is for some of their horses, and also allowing their horses to eat. So I went hacking on Harley Bear this morning, and I was on my own, and I went kind of round the golf course, and then you have to turn off the golf course, and you're on you're next to a road, but you're kind of behind a hedge, and then you're on quite a wide common. But it's a big road, it's fast. And we were doing really well. And then just before we turned onto the hedge bit, we met like 7 riders from a riding school. And so when they went past, he then was like, oh, this is a bit difficult. And I was like, you're okay. And we just kept walking, but the cars are coming by on the other side of the hedge quite quick. So he's getting a little bit tense, cross the road, come back. And I get on the common, and he's just getting quite tense. He's jogging underneath me, and a car went by, and it like went over a drain quite quickly. And he shot forward into canter and did a few strides of canter. And I was like, I went through my head, and I'll just kind of give you what I went through in my head. Because I was like, okay, I tried my normal stuff, which was like a bit more hug around the leg, a little bit more contact. Am I relaxed through my seat bones? Are my hips relaxed? Am I gripping anywhere? Am I breathing properly? I did all my checks that I normally do to be like, am I making this worse? Can I make this better? And then I was like, okay, I could ride this home. It's not like he's going to go anywhere. He just doesn't feel very nice. And then I was like, could I try and help him in this moment for like future pennies to help him regulate himself? And I was like, I think I'm going to get off, because he's like looking around. He has this thing where when he gets anxious, he starts looking backwards. And I'm like, he just feels really alone. It's like he forgets that you're there.
I was going to say, and also probably looking for a horse to come and rescue him from this emotional hardship.
Emotional turmoil. And I was like, I knew that we were coming up to this common that gets really quiet. It's far away from the road, and it has a bench, to be honest. It has a bench, right? So I did wait. Okay, I didn't get off as early as I could have, partly because it was a bit close to the road and I didn't feel safe. And I think that's important. I didn't want to get off there and then. Waited till we got around the corner, and he was still quite up, but as soon as I got off, he was like, I forgot you were there. And I was like, this is interesting information. And we went and had a little snack, and he would like snatch me scruss and look up, head up. And I was like, and he did that a couple of times, and I was like, oh God, it's not working. He's like 2. And I was like, just hang on. And he starts moving, right? He's like moving, eating grass, moving. And I was like, oh, he just needs to move his body because he feels maybe a little bit anxious in his body. And I was like, okay, this is fine. I was like, let him move, let him walk and eat and walk and eat. The more I did that, the quieter he got. And eventually he was just standing there eating. It took me like literally 4 minutes. That was it. I just stood there. And then I got back on at the bench and we walked home on a long rein. And he was like, yeah, I'm cool, I'm fine. And I was like, this is great. And I just kept thinking, this is such a shortcut. It really feels like a shortcut. You're like, do you know that you can reset yourself? Do you know that you can regulate? And I did try. Before I got off, I said, do you want to stop and have a little snack? And he was like, no, too much, can't do it. And I was like, okay, too far. But I think at some point, he's already got so much better at hacking alone. And I really feel like the walking alongside him, amongst other things, has made that helpful. But I just think these little things that we can do for our future selves and future them, it was a really good moment.
That's amazing. I really am proud of you for listening to him and going with that, trying that out, essentially. Yeah. I think it is really important to say at this point, this is not going to solve the problem if you are getting on a very stressed horse to go for a hack. And I wanted to just say this because I was sort of envisaging it and thinking, God, if people are like getting on a horse that is like chomping cantering sideways, and then they get off halfway through the hack, it's too late. You need to do a lot more work beforehand. So just a dabble of salt required in this moment, I think. And I wanted to say that because I think it is absolutely magic what you're talking about. And that is so wonderful. It's just obviously you have done a lot of work for him to know about regulation through you being on the ground near him for this to then be enabled. If you have never taught your horse about a regulation with a human, you getting off on a hack is potentially not going to be it's not going to be the solution, but going on the hack is also not the solution.
And I also want to be clear, like, I don't ask him to do things that I think are going to put him over his limit. He doesn't go out on his own for longer than like half an hour right now, maybe max, right? Because he finds that hard. The longer he's out, the more challenging he finds it, and the more likely you are to run into things that you can't control, motorbikes, dogs, people that stress him out. So I don't ask him to do that. There are certain I pushed him today because that road is difficult for him. He finds it hard, and it's sad because had we not met those riders, he wouldn't have been quite so upset. But it's not. I think this is the other thing, is you don't have to wait until they're absolutely losing their minds and rearing up and launching through the air before you go, oh, I could actually help make this better for you and easier.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. So
that's the thing, isn't it? Is if you're at that point where your horse is rearing up and leaping through the air, you've got to work on where that's coming from in the first place. Yeah. Fascinating, though. I love this so much. And I think this is such an important thing to remember. It's not a failure to get off when you go for a hack. Like,
I was talking to somebody about it.
Meet something that's hard and your horse needs support. Your horse needs support. And if you can do that from the ground better. Sorry, Miri. If you can do that better from the ground, then do it better from the ground. That's the line.
But you're literally using their natural instincts to help them. Like when they eat, they eat because they feel safe. Their head goes down. They start chewing. They relax. If they want to move their feet, it's just like a no-brainer. You're helping them by teaching them things about horses that horses do. This is terribly articulated, but horses are just really cool as animals.
They are.
Yeah.
They really are.
And it was good. And what was nice is when I got back, I was waiting for him to yawn, because normally when he's been out on his own, especially if he's found something difficult, he comes home and he yawns. Actually, even when he's in company, and he didn't today. And I'm not saying that he was completely fine, but that was a really big thing. I was like, wow, the fact that he didn't go, safe now, The
pendulation had already happened.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what we're talking about, to explain, our nervous systems pendulate between sympathetic and parasympathetic. Your sympathetic is your fight-flight. Your parasympathetic is your rest and digest. And what happens is we are permanently pendulating between them. And we can get really stuck in our sympathetic, where we are like really heightened. And then we can if we're good, we're working out, we can pendulate back into rest and digest. And sometimes what happens is when you see a horse shifting from their sympathetic to their parasympathetic nervous system, you will see things happening like yawning, licking and chewing, processing. And it's a really wide scale, guys. It's not black, it's not white. It is the biggest, greyest scale of stuff you could ever find, because there will be processing that takes place in small moments, and it's not always because they have been met by a really stressful thing or a stressful thing at all. Sometimes it can be that you move something through the body physically, and then you see that processing, that licking, chewing, down regulation. But it is interesting that Rhi has spoken about before, and if you guys, this is the first episode, Rhi has spoken before about coming back from a hack and Harley yawning when she takes his bridle off afterwards. And what we're talking about is that potentially was saying that he was then down regulating when he came back from the slightly stressful from the slightly stressed state into a less stressed state. And he's like, oh, I'm back, I can let go, I can yawn. And it's just interesting to understand that. So if you, for example, I had a client, I think she'll probably have listened to this, who brought her lovely new pony, her daughter's pony, over to see us. They've just bought the new pony. She came for a lesson and to see Mandy, the saddler, because she's far away and Mandy couldn't go to her, so she came to us. And it felt so cool to be able to do that, by the way, to have a place where I could invite people to do that. That felt really great yesterday. Anyway, when we put this pony's bridle on, the pony has quite a strong bit, jumping pony, not used to the jumping pony now. And my client is like the most wonderful, holistic, open-minded, super soft, gentle, lovely lady. This pony, as soon as we put the bridle on, started yawning. And I said, we're not just going to have a saddle fitting today, we're going to have a bridle fitting. And we went through it, and it was so cool. I went to my tack room, I tinkered about with the bridle, and I came back out with this lovely soft bit, the same shaped bit that you ride Harley in. The expert bit's comfy barrel, but with full cheeks, because it sits slightly different angle in the mouth. And we put this bit in this pony's mouth, and she did do a yawn straight away, because I think she was expecting the feeling of the other bit. And then it was like her whole face changed. Her bottom lip dropped a couple of centimeters. Her muzzle was just like, it like opened. I can't, it was just my favourite thing ever.
They're so cool. They really are.
Yeah.
They're just so cool.
Being able to help them is just the best thing in the world. Because in helping them, you're helping people, and in helping people, you're helping them. And it feels like this kind of cycle of things that is so powerful when we get it right, but it can feel like hell when it's wrong.
Yeah.
Turmoil. Yeah. Wow. We got into it today.
Yeah. Good.
Fascinating.
Good day.
Yeah. Loved it. Claire, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. You know, I'm an avid listener, so it's just wonderful to be a guest. I'm really honoured. Thank you.
And thank you, actually, probably first and foremost to Westgate for supporting us from the very get-go. You know, you guys have been part of what we do for a long time, and we've loved talking about you guys. And before we say anything else, there will be a discount code with Westgate Labs in the show notes. So there you go, Claire, our little push at the beginning. But Claire, can you tell us a bit about Westgate Labs for somebody who literally has no idea what Westgate Labs does and why it's so important? Yeah, give us a little whistle-stop tour to get us started.
Yeah, we're specialists in parasite control, and that's really been grown out of a lifelong love of horses, and actually when I was a teenager, testing our own and finding the difficulty in that. So my dad's a scientist, and he was thinking there's got to be a better way than just giving all these wormers. We're in Northumberland, we're in sheep country, and there was lots of discussion around the sort of late 90s about resistance. And that's kind of where it was all born from. And science is, we're all about evidence-based. So you wouldn't give a wormer unless you actually knew you needed it. And we wanted to begin it with our own horses, and we found a real difficulty in doing that. And he was like, well, I'm sure we could just do it ourselves. So that's really how it began in the late 90s. And then we started, my sister and I went to horse shows, and he would be going around the collecting ring, picking up other horses' poo, which is like really embarrassing as a teenager, but it's so worthwhile because we realised we weren't seeing a lot in our own horses, but actually the horses of other people on in a decent level competition had really high counts. So we knew the testing was correct, but also that the wider population had a real parasite problem. And my dad's a bit of an entrepreneur, and he like piqued his interest, and he was like, well, hang on a minute, like we could really be doing better about all of this. And that's really how it all began. And so in 1999 he put the first advert in Horse and Hound, which was test your horse for worms, and people started to send horse poo and checks. And he thought, oh my gosh, we've got a business here, but also like what an opportunity to do different, because wormers are, well, the more you use them, the quicker the resistance builds. They're bad for our environment. Really, we're using them irresponsibly, which is toxic to the environment. It's not good for your horse. It's expensive. There are so many reasons why actually parasite control would be way better if everybody was using evidence-based, and then we were only using them when we needed them, and that would maintain them for as long as possible. And we're already kind of on this sticky wicket. So we're getting to a point where ignorance is no longer just the kind of promoter of horses getting sick from parasite infection and disease, but actually the wormers aren't working, and therefore resistance is, these perfectly well kept, well managed horses, the wormers aren't being effective, and it's opening the door for parasite disease again. And these tiny little worms, you can't even see with the naked eye. Actually, for all the developments in veterinary medicine, they could be our undoing. It's such a big issue. And so from this kind of beginning, it's kind of burgeoned into actually being at the forefront and the pioneers of test-based parasite control for horses, improving all the way that they're used, a more sustainable approach to wormers, and that's kind of grown out of that.
It is amazing to see how far the business has come, because my dad was a shepherd for most of his life. And we were having a conversation just a couple of weeks ago where he said, this all started with the sheep farmers, the shepherds, who were quite lazy and blanket doing, and now it's trickled down. And to see how you've gone from like your dad in the collecting ring taking poo to how easy it is, because it sounds complicated when you think about the science, but actually like on my yard, I'm on a full livery yard, and it was actually our vets that came to our yard owner and said, hey, we have a worming program, would you like to be part of it? Owners opt in. I think almost everyone, if not everyone on our yard, is opted in. The yard owners go around, they collect the samples, they send it off. We get an email being like, this is your worm count, this is what we're going to do. And in the time that I've owned Harley, so I've owned him for almost 3 years now, I think he needed a wormer, the optional wormers. Obviously, there's a couple that you have to give and what have you, but only like twice. That's it. And amazing. So, it's just, it really is very easy.
Yeah, and we think of horses either being on that 8-week schedule to begin with our older style chemicals, or then like the modern kind of every 3 months with our Equest products. And actually so many of those are unnecessary. And that's what the amazing thing that testing brings, is that visual of which horses and how do you target them. And that even in a herd, not every horse needs treatment. And that means just, it's so much, there's a term called refugia in terms of resistance. So we're leaving some horses untreated, which means that we're not kind of proliferating the breeding of a resistant worm population. And it's much better as well for the ground, like wormers are ecotoxic, and we can come on and talk about that, and our dung beetles and things like that. So there's so many reasons why it's amazing.
So let's break it down a little bit. Okay, so we've got this amazing business that has been helping horses throughout the years, and it has grown into something where you guys are now leading the way when it comes to the wormer resistance issue. Can we talk a little bit in more detail about that? So you mentioned that in sheep, and this is my understanding, and if I maybe give you what I understand of it, which is probably quite a layman's terms version, we only have a certain number of chemicals for worming horses. And we only had the same number, we have this similar issue within sheep. And with sheep, everything was just being wormed. And essentially, people ran out of chemicals to worm sheep. And we are going in the same direction for horses, because no one is developing a new wormer that suddenly wipes out everything. And so we need to make sure that we aren't just using the wormers willy-nilly, we're using them only when we need them. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we've got 5 chemicals for horses. So we've got fenbendazole and pyrantel are our oldest ones that have been around since like the 1960s. And then in the 90s, we developed ivermectin, or 80s ivermectin, 90s moxidectin, and then praziquantel, which is our tapewormer. And that's all we've got. And all of those have come from agriculture, because the big thing about horses is the markets aren't big enough for the pharmaceutical companies to invest in developing for horses. So most of our wins have come through from the agricultural area, where food producing animals, there's profit within that. So the latest ones that have been developed for sheep have been toxic. There aren't any for horses in development, and so we're waiting and we're looking. I mean, scientists are exploring all sorts of different things like tannins and fungi and all of these cool things, but then even licensing a wormer will cost millions of pounds, so the investment is huge to get there. And then when we're in a situation where we're saying, oh, but only give them at certain times, and many horses that are really well managed, healthy adults, are getting like 1 or fewer in a year, that's not a great deal. You know, we think of, what have we got, 750,000 horses in the UK, something like that. So it's not a great deal when you're looking at the investment versus the payback from a commercial point of view, even though that's the right thing. So it's big.
And so can you give us some numbers on, like, how close are we to this resistance? Have we got a tangible kind of, like, out of those 750,000 horses, which I didn't know that number, which I think is super interesting to kind of put into perspective, you know, how many people are testing and then, you know, worming accordingly? And how many are we, how much of a problem are we still dealing with these untested horses that are having wormers that they maybe don't need?
It's really difficult to know and to do the maths on it. The latest kind of information we've got comes from a beaver study in about 2018-19, and they looked at basically for every 1 worm egg count, we give 11 wormers as a treatment. So that's exactly the wrong way round. So we're looking then at probably well over 1 million wormers that are being used indiscriminately and are going out into the environment, and we don't know if we need them. And most likely, looking at testing, you don't need them. So what we really would love to do is to repeat that. Now, we grow year on year, we test more horses year on year. I would really like to think that is improving. Certainly the latest beaver research and the surveys they've done, people are saying they're doing more testing, and it's just really difficult to add it all up and get that comparison. So if we could repeat that, that would be amazing. I'd really love, perhaps in like 2028, to do a 10-year on and see, because there's been so much movement now towards targeted worming. We've got Canter, which we can go on and talk about as well, and which is a pan-industry group that's really driven to tackle this issue because it's so huge. And I think, well, I think the trajectory is good. There's always more you can do.
That number floored me, that for every 1 egg count, 11 wormers. And I was thinking immediately, put my strategy head on, which is my day job, and was like, I wonder why people aren't worming. What are the barriers to the messaging, and like blah blah blah. And I one thing I immediately thought of, which I would think if I were on a DIY yard, is if I choose to do a worm egg count, but I'm on a DIY yard where other people are giving wormers, how effective is that? Like, can you talk us through that scenario? Does it still work, or is it actually you need the whole yard on board?
The whole yard would be ideal, but if all you can monitor is your own horse, like, at least you know what's going on within them and you can deal with that appropriately. And we have had situations where, despite individuals' best efforts, because of the management and everything else that was going on, there was a lot of parasite challenge in the environment that those horses were living in. So because of maybe no poo picking and resting, rotating, you get a lot of larval build-up on the pasture, and that's what the horses are ingesting on a daily basis. And therefore, if you've got that and the horses are not dealing well with it, you're always going to be fighting against that. So at least if you can deal with them together as a concerted effort, and you're looking at breaking the life cycle, both in the horses, like inside with a targeted worming strategy, but also on the pasture by doing your management, then that's the best way to keep on top of it.
So maybe then, if you're on a DIY yard and, okay, you can't control everyone, but your horse is only out with 2 or 3 other owners' horses, maybe you can have a little conversation with them and be like, well, our field, we could do a worm egg program together, and we, poo pick and whatever, and you can actually control that mini environment almost.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, great idea.
Could you tell us, Claire, what the outcome would be if we don't change? What is the reality that could hit the equestrian industry? And I want you to be as bold as you need to be. This is your, stand on your soapbox and tell us why this is so important.
Oh, huge impacts. Parasitologists are saying that if we carry on as we are, blanket worming, that it will be years, not decades, where we have multi-resistant strains of worms on pastures, which means the resistance develops on the actual premises because the life cycle is on the fields and getting ingested into the horses. And so when we talk about our businesses, livery yards, establishments, studs, where so much investment goes into that, developing the facilities on that yard, and then if you get resistant worms, it means you can't keep horses healthy. Basically, there's no way to treat those parasites. And then we're talking about, well, the only way to continue is to really drop our stocking densities so that we have very few horses there, which is not economically sustainable. So it really puts pressure on all of the places. We've already got pressure on land and from housing and development and everything else, from livery yards and riding schools and studs, but this is added pressure on land, which really would be a disaster for so many businesses where they put that heart and soul, because it's very difficult to pick that up and move it to somewhere where there is grazing, that then the worms are going to be susceptible and the horses can carry on living happily. So this is massive in terms of economic and everything else for the equestrian industry.
I kind of don't want to ask this question, but I also feel like I want the answer. Do you have any examples, or what would it look like if you had a horse that was worm resistant? Is that the right phrase? Worm resistant? No.
Wormer
resistant. Worm resistant. That would be ideal. Wormer resistant. And, you've reached their threshold of being able to accept a wormer. What happens if they get an excessive worm burden? What happens?
It's overwhelmed, basically. So we'd hope we don't get there. We'd need to monitor that to make sure that it was true worm egg resistance, and we'd be doing that by our reduction testing. So you can actually use worm egg counts and with tapeworm, a different test, to look at how effective that wormer has been. Ideally, you'd want to do that in a herd environment, because one individual gives you information, but it's not a true way of saying there's definite resistance. So you want to look at the thresholds of maybe, definitely, or kind of indeterminate, which means that then you've got a cohort of horses that need a treatment. You give them a treatment, and then 10 to 14 days later you do a reduction test, you do another worm egg count, and if within those horses enough of them still have eggs that are being shed to a level that means that the treatment, there's still adult worms there that are present, that means the wormer hasn't been effective for that particular chemical. So that's the way to test, and in that case you would try a different chemical and you would hope that that was effective. So if again you did another reduction test and you saw that again that hadn't been effective, and you were looking at multi-resistant strains, you're looking at all of the different ways that you can support that horse. And there are very few places, luckily, where that is the case currently, but it is happening, and it's happening faster on studs because they've got young horses and the horses need worm more frequently, and therefore the exposure breeds the resistant worm population faster. And then in which case, certainly as young horses become more mature, they get more resilient naturally to parasite infection. You'd be looking at really getting on top of your paddock management to keep the worm thresholds low on the pasture so that that challenge was as low as possible. But there could be instances where, despite best efforts, that parasite burden grows, we aren't able to get on top of it, the horse isn't able to be resilient enough to withstand that, and then you get disease. And depending on the different parasites, that would depend on the sort of symptoms you would see. And with small redworm, and it would be things like anemia and colic and basic overwhelm. We get a larval steatostominosis, like a colic, from those encysted small redworm and that we were mentioning earlier. That's very difficult to treat, often fatal, but there are so many ways that horses unfortunately can die of parasites, and when we can't treat them, that's where we're at. That's what we're facing.
Yeah, I just wanted you to say it out loud. Like, if you have a horse who gets to the point where they are resistant to all the wormers, that's literally it. Like, you can't, there's no, flushing out the system. There's no operation for that. Like, that's it. So I think that's why we're trying to talk about how serious it is, I guess.
Oh, yeah, mega serious. Yeah, horses die of worms. That's just a case. Yeah.
And I think it's important to mention as well that, you went through that as a best case scenario, in the sense of if you found out that your horse was partially resistant, then you did the resistance testing, then you did the recurrent testing. There are places, I know them, I hear them all the time. People send me messages when I talk about Westgate on my social media. People drop me messages and they say, we don't do any testing. Full blanket worming every 3 months, huge livery yards. They wouldn't know. They wouldn't know if these horses were getting sick, and then these horses would get sicker and sicker, and then these whole herds of horses would be really poorly. And I know maybe that's dramatic, but also if there are places where they are doing zero, then surely this is a risk, right?
Oh, it's not just a risk, it's a reality. It happens. People ring us and say, we've had 3-4 horses die of worm burden. We need to get onto this. What can we do? Where are we at? That's just where it's at with worm burdens, and you don't hear it very often, but those cases are out there, and obviously we're really happy to help those people, to put them on a program to start to monitor that, because actually evidence gives you that knowledge that's lacking otherwise, because we can't, wormers are much less effective than they used to be, full stop, and we can be giving them with our best intention, and they're not doing any good, or they're not quelling the burden to a point where the horse can deal with it, because that's what we're trying to do. Not trying to eradicate them, not trying to get them to a place where the horse is overwhelmed and we get disease as a result. It's that happy medium, that balance that we're seeking.
Everything in moderation, including worms. Not to take us down a further gloomy path, but I wanted to talk about how the current situation in the UK is exasperating your job and the status, because if you're not based in the UK, or you're up north or somewhere, I think north's pretty dry too, but in the south, in the south particularly, it is brown. Like, it is so dry. We haven't had rain for weeks and weeks and weeks, and the fields are really hard. Does that impact how you think about testing and worm egg counts?
It's a really fascinating one. We really saw it last year. We know we had that really dry August and going into September. And what we'd expected was that hot, dry ground and the land being the way it was would actually reduce parasite infection, because we hear about UV levels breaking out open the dung piles and killing off the eggs and larvae. Actually, we saw exactly the opposite. We usually work on a threshold of 80% of the worms being in 20% of the horses, and when we look from a population level, we are around that on a threshold of worming at 200 eggs per gram or above. We are kind of, sitting nicely in the sort of 15 to 20% of horses needing a treatment, and the rest being fine unmanaged in terms of the egg shedding of that. But actually what we saw towards the back end of the early autumn, back end of the summer, is that on a population level, those thresholds went to around 30% or more horses needing a treatment. And we saw that in a number of yards. So there's a yard who tests with us every 12 weeks. They would normally, out of their yard of 12, worm 2 or 3. And last autumn they wormed 9. And it was replicated yard after yard of that, and it was generally the yards that didn't have poo picking that saw that. So where there was good paddock management, they were generally in and around the similar level, but without that management intervention, that's where they were really struggling with seeing the worm egg counts rising and needing to step in.
I'm so interested in this because last year I went through that hot summer and my grazing was frazzled. I wasn't allowed to put any hay out, which I think is a contributing factor because it meant that the horses were really desperate for what they could get. Stables were too hot, horses had to go in fields. It was a very difficult situation that I was in. I had the exact same thing, and I remember you and I, Claire, did a webinar and we spoke about this a lot, didn't we, with the lovely lady from Equicell,
Jackie
right?
Matthews, yeah, from Austin Davis.
From Austin Davis, that's right. And we spoke all about this, and I definitely saw that curve in my yard myself, and I wasn't able to poo pick. Our fields were enormous. We weren't really, we poo picked some, but not all. And I experienced exactly what you were saying. And I'm so interested because this year we poo pick everything, all the time, every day. And I know that maybe isn't ideal for the dung beetles, the everyday thing, or maybe we can get on to the ideal paddock management. But for us, it is what we're doing at the moment. I'll stand corrected if I need to be. But it's super interesting because will our worm egg counts be different because we are doing that every day? We're not leaving the horses grazing next to their droppings so much.
Well, we can be your opposite because our fields are massive and we don't poo pick. We do roll and harrow and all the things, and we have regular worm egg counts. But I'd be interested now to, I don't know when our next one is. I feel like it's coming up actually in the next couple of weeks. But it would be interesting to see if we see a shift with the dry summer, and like, you know, we've got kind of the two sides of the management still, but we'll keep you posted. Yeah,
it will be fascinating. And we came up with several hypotheses for why that would be. And I think because of the temperatures being sustained around sort of like, 20, 25 degrees, that's optimum temperature for the eggs hatching, particularly of the small red worm that we've got. So that would have expedited that. And I think that combined with the lack of forage that meant that horses couldn't be rotated and grazed on different paddocks probably meant they were grazing closer to the soil, closer to the piles of dung that were there. And that would have helped the infection, because what happens is the eggs are shed in the dung, and then about 5 to 7 days later they're hatching. And if you're a tiny larval worm, your whole goal in life is to crawl up a blade of grass and get eaten by a horse again, and that's how they get reinfected, by the horse just ingesting them as they're grazing. And of course, if the horses are nearer and they're going back over that same ground and you're not able to move them onto fresh ground, you're just going to perpetuate that and get them back in the horses sooner, and there's the challenge. And I think that's why we saw that massive spike, and I would imagine that the same is going to be true of this hot season that we've just had.
Can I also just say that ages ago, that very visceral image of the larvae like crawling up the the blade of grass, one, gross, but two, you mentioned, it was years ago I think, about where your muck heap is in relation to your fields, because you said the same thing, there's like a migration, and that image never left me. The idea of all these little larvae just crawling their way back to the fields, gross, but really a smart point of view.
So this maybe is a good moment to talk about paddock management. Look, I get this isn't the most romantic topic, guys, and we know that maybe you're wondering, why is this so important? But could you give us some information, Claire, like what is the best gold standard paddock management?
I think the most important thing is do your poo picking, and do it at least twice a week. And again, it's not sexy, but I think that parasites are really interesting. Their life cycles are amazing. Like, it never fails to amaze me just how they evolved to do that. And you add in tapeworm and an orobatid mite that you also need on your grassland. I know, it's wild. And you think, how did that ever come to be that the tapeworm needed the mite to then get back into the horse, and without it can't happen. So that's a bit of an aside. I know, it blows my mind, right?
We're making faces because it's gross. Like, obviously very interesting, but also tapeworm, gross.
They're so tenacious, parasites,
I never forget that guy that ate a tapeworm. Do you remember that? He did it. It was a TV program.
What?
He did it on purpose. He ate a tapeworm thing on purpose. It was horrific.
Did 18th century women not take them to stay slim? It was a treatment.
Oh,
no way.
Yeah, I'm sure of old it was a thing.
20th century, did you say?
No, I think like 17th, 18th century. Like
18th century women, you would have loved Ozempic. Sorry, paddock management.
Don't take tapeworm. Don't do it.
Don't do it.
No.
Don't take Ozempic either, preferably, but
Right, back to the podcast. So, paddock management.
Yes. We're looking at those eggs hatching at 5 to 7 days, and if we can do our poo picking at least twice a week to remove that dung from the pasture before those eggs hatch, you're not going to get the larvae onto your pasture, and therefore that's going to do masses in terms of your level of parasite risk that's there on the pasture as your horses are grazing. So that would be like the number one thing that you could do for your paddock management to break that life cycle. And there's loads of studies been done about just how effective that is. You know, like over a season, the ones that have been poo picked, you see this parabola of egg shedding which never gets above sort of like a medium level and comes down again, and ones that aren't poo picked, the worm egg counts going up and up without intervention. So as effective as giving a treatment as seeing that come down over a season. So absolutely brilliant, but also like resting and rotating as much as possible. So, which is hard when you have fatties. You know, I run a track system for hours and they are on the same pasture back and over, but the poo picking helps that one. If you can rest a field for like at least 6-9 months a year, fabulous in terms of the larvae dying off there. But if not, put some sheep or cattle or other kind of cross grazers on it, because they're like hoovers of worms. The parasites are species specific. A horse larvae getting into a sheep is toast.
Clever. Worm Hoover. I love that. That's so smart. I for a second I was like, she's not suggesting that we sacrifice our sheep for the horses. And then when you said species specific, I was like, okay, fine. Worm Hoover. Love it.
They kind of look like a hoover too, don't they?
A woolly hoover.
Yeah, a bit.
Yeah.
There's a mental image for you, Rhi.
I love a mental image. That's a great one. Okay, this is good.
Superb. And quarantining, really important. And if you've got horses coming, you do not know what they're bringing with them, and you do not want that shed all over your pasture. So if you can test them first and make sure that they're not going to be shedding parasites, we've got to start thinking of it as transmissible diseases in the same way that we do other equestrian illnesses. Like, let's not let them in and shed all over our fields before we've dealt with that.
That's clever. I hadn't really thought about that. I think we think we're on kind of high alert for strangles and those sorts of things when horses arrive, but you don't think about just what's in their body already. I wanted to ask about small infested redworm and maybe others, you'll have to correct me, because there are some things that you can't not worm for. Like every year, I think it is, there's a specific wormer that you give horses. So can you tell us about that versus the ones that we can just do testing for and maybe not worm?
Yeah, absolutely. So the cornerstone of a worm egg count or a targeted program are your worm egg counts, which are predominantly testing for your egg shedding small redworm and ascarid, which are two of the most common parasites. Small redworm, like ubiquitous across the world. 95% of a healthy adult horse's parasite burden is going to be those guys. Then we've got our ascarids. We do see tapeworm in a worm egg count, but not reliably because they're shed in packets. So we'll report it if we see it, but a tapeworm ELISA, like an equisal saliva, or you can do a blood version for that. And they're the ones, the testing that we need to do regularly, but we need to use the worm egg counts within the limitations of them and the knowledge of that to be effective. And what they don't test for, because we're monitoring those adult egg shedding by the nature of the beast, you know, the names on the title, that we actually need to do hang on, I've got myself in a knot, back up a bit. So where was I at? So the worm egg counts, they test reliably for our small redworm and our ascarid. We do our saliva testing for our tapeworm, and then in the late autumn winter, we're looking at these encysted larvae, which are the larvae of the small redworm. So the small redworm, is part of their life cycle, they will anyway, the larvae get into a horse and they're going to encysted into the gut wall for sort of 10 to 14 days, some species of them anyway. And then they kind of grow up and emerge ready to be adult and get on with the egg laying business of being a worm. But actually what can happen is that some of them stay much longer than that. Oh, your faces are a picture, guys, I love it. And so they stay much longer, and you can get many millions of them actually just huddled in there and hunkered down. And that's especially sort of when the worm activity slows on the pasture, like below 6 degrees, and they huddle in there and they keep warm. And it can be, it's generally something like a mass emergence is generally thought of more likely in spring, and we don't know if that's increased temperatures or daylight increasing or whatever, but something can prompt all of those tiny worms to emerge from the gut all at once into the horse's gut. And that's a big trauma for the horse's intestines, as you can imagine, and that kicks off this larval steatocystomanosis colic. So you've got this active worm burden and this colic with bloody diarrhea going on in the horse, and it's really difficult to treat. You know, we lose a lot of horses. About half of the horses that come down with this actually are going to die from it, more likely in youngsters than in healthy adults. But because it is so serious, we really do, and difficult to treat, it is something that we do really need to get a hold of. And so the recommendation is that for healthy adults, we would probably want to blood test them with a small red worm blood test to see whether you can risk assess them. If they've got a series of like 3 years of really good counts, you might want to think of not needing to do that, because it's very not very likely they're going to have a big burden of these encysted larvae. But if it's fewer, you might want to do a small red worm blood test, which is going to give you information about whether you want to give a larvicidal treatment or not. But if you've got a medium or high risk horse, and we can risk assess those using Canter guidelines and a great little program which looks at the different factors that influence that, then you're going to want to step in and give a larvicidal treatment for it, which would be either our 5-day fenbendazole or our moxidectin products that we've got. And they're the two wormers that we have. And that's all we've got. So we're preserving them, particularly moxidectin, for that, and really being careful about our approach to that horrible disease that horses get from those parasites.
That is very scary. I'm glad to hear there's a blood test. I didn't register actually that there was a blood test for that. Is there any scientific exploration going on looking into other ways of testing, like, you know, you think of the saliva test and the poo sample test, they feel very accessible and very like low barrier, whereas a blood test feels a little bit more, you've got to get the vet out, you've got to do this, is there exploring going on in that area?
Yeah, I think the really good news is that we've got more and more tests coming on board. So the small red worm blood test was launched in about 2019, I think it was. So it's still fairly new, and there's a specific cohort of horses that it's suitable for, and really good for those particular at helping to determine do they need that treatment or not, because of it detecting the encysted as well as the adult stages of that parasite. But we've got incidental tests as well that we use. So we've got a tape test for pinworm, we can test for liver fluke and lungworm and things like that as well. And I really think that is an area of development that we're going to see much more of, alongside these management techniques as well, to look at how do we reduce our parasite, the chemical use of wormers for parasites.
This might be a stupid question, Claire, but aside from like the worm tummy that we sometimes see with like rescue cases online, and obviously your horse colicking or bleeding, etc., are there any signs, kind of everyday signs, that your horse might be struggling with worms, or is it just like we just don't know until we do the tests or look inside?
It is really difficult to know, because there are so many symptoms that could be anything. You know, you wouldn't know whether it was parasites or something else that was ailing it. You know, it can be like, you know, not doing well, not putting weight on properly, and a bit of anemia, a bit of peritonitis type symptoms, something like that. There are specific parasites, like ascarids have a migratory stage where they go to the lungs, and that makes horses cough. But so does lungworm, which is a parasite they can get if they graze alongside of donkeys. So those are just a couple of things to watch out for. But generally speaking, worm burdens are something that you really can't tell, and then all of a sudden you've got something catastrophic going on. And it is really the testing is why it's so important, because it really helps us get on top of that before the awful things start to happen.
That's fair.
God, that was a bit heavy going in the middle. There was a time when I really was viscerally imagining the red worm, and my parents are both, my mum's a parasitologist, my dad's an entomologist. Like, they're like, oh, worms, interesting. So I've like grown up with this, and even then, still, it is so difficult to understand that, like to feel, well, it makes you feel really unwell to think about it. For me, and I think, like, it's one of those things, isn't it? All horses have a worm burden. And this was something that I only learnt not very long ago. And it's that cycle is continuous, and that cycle is there a benefit to a horse to have a low worm burden? Why is that? Do we know why this is part of their physiology?
They do think so. Yeah, it's a really interesting part of medicine, and a lot of that knowledge is coming across from the human side of things, because they think that having a low burden challenges the immune system in a way that it can deal with, and that's a good thing for a horse. And I think some of the worms actually have, like, emit a kind of gut calming influence. They have evolved over millions of years to live symbiotically like that, and it's really only the way that we keep horses now that puts the ball firmly in the court of the parasites who play into their hands. Because if you can imagine, like, the horses roaming these big plains, and every time the worm eggs were dropped in the dung and those larvae wriggled away waiting to be eaten by a horse, they'd have to really wait a long time, which is why the parasites evolved to kick out like tens of thousands, or in some cases like millions of eggs every day. That's why the worm egg counts can take such a small amount of dung, homogenize that, and we've still got a good, pretty reliable measure of the egg shedding that's going on in that particular horse. And so then, you know, it's going to be eaten on that plain by like a mountain goat or a woolly mammoth or something like that, and as we've already said, toast. But we put them in these small paddocks and they graze back over and over and over, and all of a sudden, like, you ramp that potential for infection like way high. And so I think that's really where we get to where we are with our current problems, and then the fact that they're going to cause disease. And if we try and eradicate those worms completely, we're just going to drive resistance. I mean, that's exactly what we did with our small red worm. They've got a really fast life cycle of 4 to 5 weeks. We give the wormers every 8 weeks, and therefore you're hitting them, and every time they're breeding, it's a hereditary kind of gene manipulation that goes on, a modification for this resistance to occur. And then you've got then a resistant population of worms that aren't susceptible to your wormer anymore. So we've got now this low level of, we're trying to eradicate them, and then the horses, from an autoimmune perspective, we know in humans that if we take away pathogen challenge, we get autoimmune diseases because the system turns in on itself. And the same potentially could be true of horses. So actually, this low level is normal and natural, and it's what we want. You know, we don't want to be kind of stripping them of every pathogen, because then there is potential that could backfire on us too.
I know.
Existential.
Claire, was there anything that you particularly thought you wanted to say that we haven't said?
I guess really the other thing on a parasite point of view to say would be the potential re-emergence of large strongyle, which again is this whole kind of dealing with the resistance versus the need to treat for this particular parasite, and an extra layer that we're now encouraging people to add into their programs because of it. And it's a developing area of parasitology, particularly Europe, and as such the UK, because of it.
So what is that other tier?
Yes, so we've got small and large redworm, and we really hadn't had to think about large redworm for a long time in this country. Like, one thing that our regular program of treatments did in the 1960s, 70s was virtually eradicate this parasite. It's a bloodworm, so the larval stages of the large redworm, or the Strongylis vulgaris is like its technical term, the larvae don't stay in the gut. They actually migrate through the arteries that supply the intestinal tract, and they're grazing as they go. And you can imagine then the damage potential for that in terms of cutting off blood supply to intestines. You get impactions and blockages and hemorrhages and things like that. And so they're very damaging. They're one of the most dangerous parasites that our horses can get. And we haven't really had to worry about them. You know, they were like a footnote on parasitology textbooks. However, one of the consequences of going to a much more minimal worming schedule is that it's allowed this parasite to potentially re-emerge. And we've really seen that in European countries like Sweden. So I think it was in about 2006 where Sweden or 2008, so around then, where you couldn't get a wormer without a worm egg count that indicated that you needed a treatment, and that was a blanket ban across Sweden. And so overnight they went to targeted treatments, and there was nothing else that could be done for that. And what they did was they monitored Swedish livery yard for the prevalence of this large strongyle, and like less than 6% of horses were infected, and then they came back and did the same in like 2015, and more than 50% of horses were infected with large strongyle. And so it doesn't mean the same is happening in the UK, but this pressure to move to doing less treatments for the resistant in the small redworm is potentially opening the door for resurgence of large strongyle, and especially because we're getting more international horse movements as well, this could be opening the door for a resurgence. And one of the difficulties that we have is that when we do a worm egg count, the strongyle eggs look the same of the large and the small strongyle, so we can't differentiate that and say, hang on, you have a problem. And whereas we want to leave a certain number of egg shedding in a small redworm untreated because we know that they can deal well with that, we really don't want that of these worms because we know the larvae are so dangerous, and if you've got a burden, you're going to want to get on top of that. So we, in order to do that, what we're suggesting is that people begin to add larval culturing as an annual test into the programs, and it's something that we started to offer last year at Westgate to enable people to do that. And you can do that either testing individuals or composites of up to 4 horses that are sharing a field, which again helps to share that cost. And what we do then is we put the dung sample into an incubator, we give it ideal conditions to hatch, and then we put it through a process. We can extract those larvae, look at them under the microscope and identify what sort of strongyles are they large or small, and therefore what do we need to do about it. And it's just like, it's one of these things that you wouldn't know unless you test. And so we want to monitor for it, because I think it would really bite you on the bum, like to find this in your yard. We've had a few samples where we've had large redworm found on UK livery yards, so it is out there in little pockets, and it's just a case of population monitoring to know, well, like, you know, unless you do any looking, you're not going to find any trouble. So we have to start just like peeling back the layers and thinking, you know, seeing what's going on within our yards, and is it a problem or is it fine? And so far, the encouraging signs are that we don't have a big problem, but we want to know about this and be able to deal with it on the front foot, which is why parasitologists are now suggesting that, particularly for high risk horses, so youngsters, imports, ones that are on these minimal testing schedule, minimal worming schedules, that actually, those are the ones we go in first and begin to put this in a program.
Oh my gosh, it's quite terrifying. I feel like the more you learn about horses, the more you want to wrap them up in cotton wool and really look after them, but the more you realise there's man-made problems. You made me think of something just then. You talked about international shows and horses coming from different countries. Westgate actually answered this already on my social media, but I think it's worth repeating. So I shared a video recently of Harley on a hack, and he had his head right down and he's like sniffing poo, and me and my followers were making jokes about how it's like horsey Facebook because they're all catching up on the latest news. And someone actually commented and said that they had not let their horse do that before because they were concerned about worms and like, is it okay to let your horse sniff another horse's poo and when you're at shows? So could you share the way, I think we've kind of talked about it with the way that the larvae move around, but could you share the Westgate perspective on, is it okay to let your horse sniff poo at a show or out and about?
Yeah, it was me that actually answered that question on
Perfect.
your socials. Yeah. Sniffing poo is absolutely fine. Like, there's nothing they'll be able to get from it. The eggs are going to be there and embedded in the dung, and it's not an infection risk. But grazing at shows and events, particularly where there's high traffic of horses and the eggs have had chance to hatch and the larvae are going to be active, that's where I'd really be concerned about not letting your horses graze and potentially pick up parasite larvae from the pasture there, I think. So different on kind of Clearfield shows, you know, that are just there for like one event and away, but at competition centres in particular where you get high traffic, that's where I'd be pretty cautious. Oh,
that's a really good point. I hadn't even considered that actually, but yeah, it's so true. Okay, well, Claire, we have a tradition on this podcast where at the end we ask every guest the same question, and I am so interested to hear your perspective on this. So if you could tell every equestrian to do something, or you could give advice and they had to take that advice, what would you say?
Yeah, I think it would be just to stay curious and keep that sense of like, what if? And we sometimes talk about science and art and then more existential stuff like they're at odds with each other, but I think they're so complementary. You know, like, it's that whole horse holistic approach, and good science is like someone paying really close attention and asking, I wonder why, and it's what artists do and it's what good horse people do. And at Westgate, you know, we talk about assessing risk and using that knowledge and experience because every horse is different. And the tests don't replace knowing your horse, they just become another way of like listening to them. So like, we're all trying to become better students of our horses, and you know, my horse has taught me so much, and we haven't even got into like, yeah, that side of things. But science, I think, helps us to ask better questions, and then the curiosity keeps us open to those answers so that we're always moving forward and evolving. And it's relevant to poo picking, but also to our horse journeys as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And
love that.
do your poo picking.
Stay curious and do your poo picking. I love that.
That's it. Yeah, that's it.
Mic drop. I love that. Thank you so much, Claire. This has been so lovely. We've loved having you on.
Lovely in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely, gross, brilliant, makes me want to vomit. All sides.
All sides have been covered there.
Yeah, I just am the worm lady. Yeah.
I think it's important as well, like, yeah, it's not glamorous, and we've said about this before because I'm an ambassador for Westgate, and I, you know, regularly turn up talking about poo on my Instagram, and it's not glamorous, of course it's not, but the reality of keeping horses is they are livestock, essentially, you know, we are, whether we are keeping them in a 10 by 10 field or a 50-acre field, you know, you are farming them, and you've got a duty of care to look after every aspect of that. So I think, although it's not glamorous, we've got to do all of us got to do our bit. And thank you, Claire, and your amazing dad, who had the bravery to go into that warm-up when you were a kid and be like, I don't care what people think of me because I know that I'm going to do a good thing, and look what he's doing. And I had the pleasure to meet your dad, and I was actually there when he achieved his Lifetime Achievement Award. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
At the Beta Awards ball. And it was just, I don't know, it was just magic to see what that meant. And he didn't know he was receiving it, did he? It was a surprise. And to see that scientist stand up in front of all of those horse people who are, you know, leaders in the industry, it was really special. And I think, yeah, to take something so unglamorous and be so passionate about it and know that there is a greater cause is just fascinating and a wonderful thing. So thank you, Claire, for joining us today, and thank you for all that you are doing for the equestrian world. I don't think anybody would be able to do it without you, really. There we go.
Oh,
Agreed.
thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk worms with you all.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode, guys. We will see you for the next one. Goodbye for now.
Bye for now.
Bye.